Shortly after graduating high school, I started down a dark path. Along the way, I met and started hanging out frequently with friends heavy into the occult. We would go to abandoned buildings, drink, and play with Ouija boards, and do other types of rituals. My best friend Tommy was a ringleader of our little group of misfits. He was the most involved and knew the most about Ouija boards and seances. He had been doing this stuff for a long time, a lot longer than anyone else in the group. He had learned from his mother, who had been messing with the Ouija boards since her youth. After one night of partying, Tommy had asked me if I wanted to stay at his house. He still lived with his mother. He asked me if I wanted to meet the man they called the Whistler. He joked this was their resident ghost that they would usually contact when playing the Ouija board in his unfinished basement. I of course agreed and went back to play. He warned me that the ghosts could become violent and that they've had scary incidents in the past. I thought he was joking since we had never had anything crazy happen with the Ouija board before. Nothing more than the normal pointer moving and answering questions. We go down to the basement. It's about 3 a.m. at this point. We light some candles and then me and Tommy begin with the normal summoning ritual. We ask if there are spirits present, and nothing. We wait in silence, waiting for the pointer to begin moving. As we wait, I hear clear as day a tune being whistled behind me. A unique tune off in the distance. Some sort of song. I hear it repeat itself twice. Spooked, I removed my hands from the pointer and asked Tommy if he heard that also. He said he didn't hear anything. We refocus and ask again if there were any spirits present. This time, the pointer moves quickly to yes and catches us both by surprise. We move the pointer back to the center of the board and ask, "What is your name?" Not 2 seconds later, I hear the same tune, only this time, it's right over my shoulder. So loud, it made me jump. I quickly jump up and told Tommy, "I'm out of here." Running up and out of the basement, he chased after me, asking what the hell was going on. I explained. "There is no way you didn't hear that," he asked. "Hear what?" Clearly getting frustrated. I said, "The whistle." He just laughed and thought I was joking. He hadn't heard anything. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I just imagined it, but still felt uneasy about going back to the basement, so we decided to start a movie and eventually dozed off. The fact we hadn't ended the connection with the Whistler in the basement hadn't even crossed our minds, nor did what that would mean in the days to come. The next morning, I woke up and rolled off the couch to hear Tommy talking to his mother in the kitchen. I went in and said good morning. Tommy jokingly told his mother how I had heard the whistle last night while we played with the Ouija board in the basement. His mom just laughed and said sure, clearly not buying it. Apparently, no one ever hears the whistle besides her, not even Tommy. Without another word, I just start whistling the unique tune I had heard last night, and her smile quickly disappeared into a concerned look. She said, "That's his whistle." I go back home, and my parents are the complete opposite of Tommy's mom, very religious and against anything to do with the Ouija board. So like usual, I keep my experience to myself. A few days later, my mom asked me what I was doing the previous night in the kitchen around 3 a.m. I asked her what she was talking about, knowing in the back of my mind that I passed out around midnight the night before. She said, "No, I heard you whistling in the kitchen." Instantly, I got a pit in my stomach. I asked her what she was talking about, and she started to whistle the Whistler's tune. I could feel the color drain from my face. She asked me what was the matter, and I quickly changed the subject. The following days were uneventful, and as the week went on, I began to forget about the Whistler. Then one night, my dad was sleeping with one leg poking out of the covers. It was summer, and he always slept hot, so this wasn't uncommon. On this night, Coincidentally, around 3 a.m., he was suddenly awakened by someone jerking his leg so hard it almost ripped him out of bed completely. He didn't know what to make of it, and I never told him. Shortly after these two incidents, I moved out of my parents' home and haven't played with the Ouija board since. To my knowledge, all paranormal activities had ceased at my parents' house since that time as well. When I was a junior in high school, me and a couple friends decided to start messing around with a Ouija board. We got really into it for a few months until things got scary. Quick, a little backstory. My sophomore year of high school, my family uprooted me and moved me to a small town in the mountains of Pennsylvania. My parents were always buying old homes, fixing them up, and then selling, moving, and repeating the process. This time around, they decided to buy an old home that was built in the late 1800s, which had, previous to us buying it, been converted to a funeral home. It was located across the street from a massive graveyard. The home had a decent amount of acreage, with a cemetery and thick forest across the street, and cornfields behind the home. It felt very secluded. The home was not in living conditions prior to us moving there, so as we finished our school year at our old house before selling it, my dad spent a couple months living alone fixing up the new place himself to stay within the tight renovation budget. We've always been into scary movies and ghost stories, so my dad couldn't wait to tell us about the spooky things that would happen in the house while he worked there alone. Nothing crazy, just feelings of being watched or hearing footsteps on the floorboards, his radio turning on and off, or changing tracks on the CD by itself. All things that could have been cocked up to his imagination from being alone for so long up there. But still he decides to give our friendly ghost a name. Anytime we would talk about the ghost in the house, we would call him Fred, and this became sort of a family inside joke. This will be important later. Fast forward, the school year at my previous school is over, and the house is now livable, so my whole family moves in. Weird little things like lights turning on and off, or feeling like we weren't alone when no one else was in the house, weirdly enough became the norm over the following year, and we never had a bad feeling from it, so we just continued to joke about Fred. Now me and my sister wanted to fit in at the new school, obviously didn't want to be the new weird kids, so we never talked about this with any friends. Back to my junior year, my dad was out of town, and it was just me, my mom, my little sister, and my little brother home for a week or so. During this time, my friend, Rebecca, and a friend she knew from another school named Beth, called me to see if I wanted to come over because they had just gotten a Ouija board and wanted to try it out. I said sure, and we set a time for late that night to meet at Rebecca's older sister's house. Her sister had already graduated and lived in a really creepy old farmhouse, alone in the middle of the field with no neighbors in sight, so we figured that would be the perfect setting for a Ouija board. Just as the sun was fully set and I was getting ready to go, my family was in the TV room with the door closed, watching Wheel of Fortune or something, when all of a sudden my dog started going absolutely nuts out of the kitchen. This was startling because this was completely out of his character. He was an older dog and super mellow. Most of the time, we would forget he was even there. The whole family was freaking out with my dad out of town. My mom made me go check it out and see what was going on. I opened the TV room door and realized the rest of the lights were completely off in the rest of the house. We had been watching TV since before the sun went down, so didn't have lights on anywhere else. I made my way to the kitchen where I heard my dog still growling and snarling at something. I turned on the light to see him facing the wall like he had cornered something. His fur was literally standing on end, all up and down his back, and he had his eyes up, locked on some invisible entity, so intensely that he didn't even realize I was in the room, or that the light had come on. He continued his low growl, and I gently touched his back and asked what was the matter. He jumped, tucked his tail between his legs, and left the kitchen. Needless to say, the whole family was extremely on edge, and my mom asked me to stick around. but being a selfish teenager, I talked her into letting me still go out. Little did I know, that simple decision to leave my house that night would lead me down a dark and dangerous path that would haunt me forever. Now, I had never played with a Ouija board before, but Rebecca and Beth both had years prior at a slumber party, so they both knew a little how it worked. We sit down and try to make a connection. We ask, "Is there a spirit here?" And nothing happens. We ask again a few times. Then suddenly we have a little movement. I thought for sure someone was messing with me, but they both denied it. We ask, "Is there a spirit here?" It replies yes. We move the pointer back to the center and ask, "Do you know one of us?" It moves to yes. Naturally, we ask, "Do you know Rebecca?" Thinking that was the most likely, because we are in her sister's house after all. It moved to no. We said, "Do you know Beth?" Thinking that was the next logical answer, since they had been long life friends. It said no. We said, "Do you know John?" My name. And it moved very quickly to yes. My heart stopped for a second, and my hands got sweaty. I muster up enough courage to ask, "What is your name?" It moved to F-R-E-D. I got noticeably uncomfortable. Beth and Rebecca were confused and asked if I knew a Fred. I never told them or anyone about my house being haunted or anything about Fred. I asked Fred if he was what my dog Buddy was barking at tonight in the kitchen, and he said no. I asked, "Are you the only ghost in my house?" And it said no. I asked, "How many are there?" And it said 3. I asked if they are all good spirits, and he said no. Just then, we heard a big thud in the closet, quickly said goodbye, and got the hell out of there. Naturally, we told all our friends about the experience, and Rebecca's sister's house quickly became the big hangout over the next few months, where we would play at least a few times a week with a large group of friends that wanted to experience it as well. We would also play in other people's houses in different locations, and each time, after a few connections, it seemed we would always end up talking again to Fred at least once or twice a night. This was unsettling because we never played in my house, so he seemed to be attached to me wherever I went. As time went on, the connections got stronger and things got weird. I remember on one snowy night, we all gathered and played under an old-style chandelier in the dining room of Rebecca's sister's farmhouse. One of my buddies brought his girlfriend Carly, who was terrified of the idea of playing and wanted nothing to do with it. She thought she was coming to a party, but when we broke out the board, she sat in the other room, drinking a bottle of vodka herself, trying not to pay attention to what was going on in the dining room. We began with speaking to Fred, who gave me a warning. I asked if there were still 3 spirits in my house, and he said no. Now there were 8. I asked if I should be afraid, and he repeated yes, over and over. I asked what should I be afraid of. He kept repeating the same word that I didn't recognize, and it made no sense to me. I don't want to say the word out loud. More on that later. Eventually that night, we connected to another spirit, but this one became pretty nasty. The spirit was stronger than any we had talked to before. As the pointer moved swiftly around the board, the lights would flicker, as if the energy was being sucked out of the air to move the pointer. The spirit kept swearing and calling us vulgar names. The longer we talked, we noticed the chandelier above us started swaying softly. We asked who it was swearing at. As we asked this, the chandelier began to swing progressively more violent, and it spelled out C-A-R-L-Y. By the time her name was completely spelled out, the chandelier was so out of control, we were afraid it might crash down on the table, so we moved the board in the living room. Carly ran out of the house bawling hysterically after it called her out by name. I don't know if it was adrenaline or what, but my buddy then did the unthinkable. He broke the one rule we had from the beginning. He asked the spirit to reveal itself. This was a huge no-no. It gives the spirit way too much power, and we all agreed never to cross that line. But honestly, we were so addicted to the whole thing. By this point, we were all a little curious. When he asked, everything stopped. The light stopped flickering, and the chandelier stopped swaying. Nothing. Just silence. We sat there for a while, and eventually the adrenaline wore off. The board stopped moving, and we assumed we lost connection with the spirit. We decided on that note to call it a night. We all went home our separate ways. That night was one of the coldest of the year, and between the old insulation and my parents trying to save money by barely even running the heat at night, the house was freezing when I went to bed. Despite this, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. in a miserable sweat. I was so out of it from being stirred from a deep sleep, I didn't really make the connection of how abnormal this was. As I slowly came to, I realized I had kicked off all my blankets and was only covered by a paper-thin sheet, but I couldn't cool down. I was burning up. As I slowly woke up more, due to being so uncomfortable, I look around my room, which was unusually dark. Between the glow of my alarm clock across the room and my window shades being open, with the bright light of a big street lamp that always illuminates the room, I couldn't understand why the room seemed so dark. The clock was still on, but no light escaped it. The street light was lit, but the light stopped outside my window. As I continued to wake, more of my attention was directed towards the corner, diagonally across the room from my bed. In the corner stood something large. I couldn't make any shapes out, but it was the absence of light, a heavy darkness you couldn't only see, but feel. It's hard to describe, but if you have experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a feeling you'll never forget. There in the corner wasn't a spirit lurking, but a demon staring right at me. I've never felt so much fear and uneasiness in my life. It was just staring at me, not moving, not making a sound, but it was aware that I was awake and I knew it was there. I never prayed so hard in my life and vowed to never touch a Ouija board again if this demon would leave me in peace. I eventually fell back to sleep after what seemed like hours of praying, and woke the next day to everything back to normal. I never touched a Ouija board again, but I later looked up that word Fred warned me about that night, and to my disbelief, it was the name of an ancient biblical demon. I pray I never cross paths with that type of evil again.